So today we're going to talk about the margin of error, and we're going to talk about the three ways that we can change or reduce the margin of error. So the three ways that we reduce the margin of error in a confidence interval is: one, we can decrease the percent of confidence. Because if we decrease the percent, that means that we decrease Z star and the margin of error goes down. Number two, we can increase the sample size. And number three, we can decrease the standard deviation. Now, of these three, the third one is the least likely to happen. Because unless you're working with machinery in which you can make it more accurate, reducing the standard deviation of an entire population is very hard to do, especially when you don't have control over it. So we're just going to focus in on what happens when we change one and what happens with two. Alright, so for our first problem, we're going to give the information of 120 with a sigma of 12 and n equals 46, and we're going to do a 90% confidence interval, and we're going to do a 95% confidence interval. In both of these problems, we got 120 plus or minus 12 over the square root of 46, and we need the Z star. So the inverse norm of 0.025 turns out to be 1.96. The inverse norm of 5% gives me 1.644. And so when we come up with the calculations, we will get a confidence interval for each one of these. If you notice, this number is bigger, which means we will have a larger confidence interval. When I did the minus, I got 116.5. And when I did plus, we got 123.5. Now I'm going to do the same thing, except for I'm going to change this to be 1.644. So we got 117.1 to 122.9. The key here is that even though we didn't change any of the data because we used the same data, when we wanted the 95, we're more confident that the answer, that the true parameter is going to be in here. But here we have a smaller margin of error, but we're going to be right less of the time. So in this problem, we're going to get a 95% confidence interval. Our sigma is going to be 12, and our n we actually do not know. We want to find out what n equals in order to get a margin of error no bigger than 2. So 2 has to be less than or equal to Z star sigma over the square root of n. Just like in the last problem, Z star for 95% is 1.96. Sigma is 12 over the square root of n. So I'm going to multiply both sides by the square root of n. 1.96 times 12 is 23.52. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And we get the square root of n is less than or equal to 11.76. Now we're going to square both sides. And throughout this whole problem, I made a mistake with the sign. it should have been greater than, because no more than means that I don't want a confidence interval or a margin of error bigger than 2, so everything has to be less than 2. So 138.29. So when I got 138.29, I always have to round up in these problems, and so my sample size has to be 139. That's it for this particular lesson.